Hi, everyone, and welcome to this series of webinars to Be My App. My name is Lou, and thank you for joining us. Today's special edition webinar will feature Mike Hartington, an Ionic developer advocate who will talk to us about building your first app using Ionic 2. Please do write your comments on the comment section provided, and we'll be starting in a minute. But before we do, if you would like to receive news on our upcoming webinars and hacker events, have a look at bemyapp.com. Also, stay up if you want to stay up to date to our newsletters. Do register at community.bemyapp.com. And that's all from my side. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mike. Mike, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Are you ready to begin?
Yep. Let me just go ahead and start sharing my screen.
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. It's all yours.
All right. So thank you for having me. Like I said, my name is Mike Hartington. I'm a developer for the Ionic framework. M Hartington basically everywhere on the internet. Keep it simple, nice and short handle. And I'm going to talk about building apps with Ionic, what's some of the rationale behind Ionic 2, and how to actually get started and building out applications, and what are some of the goals that we had in mind when creating it. So before we kind of jump into things and go dive right into Ionic 2, let's take a step back and actually talk about Ionic 1. Ionic 1 was a very popular option for building mobile apps using web technology that was based off of Angular 1. You had Angular 1 underneath there for your coding structure, controllers, typical MVC architecture. We had Sass under there for styling our components and really enabling developers to customize the look and feel of their app to really fit their brand, something that we thought was very important. And unlike most frameworks that were out there that tried to fit every single use case, we really focused on building just mobile apps. We weren't trying to recreate a new Bootstrap, because these were things that had been around for a while and really fit the use case. There wasn't really a Bootstrap equivalent for mobile web. And with that in mind, we kind of developed a goal, very, very wide-reaching goal of being able to take web developers, give them the tools and code that they need, and empower them to take part in app development. Give them everything they need to get started, lowering the barrier of entry, and allow them to take part in this massive market of building apps and just being able to learn more. Now, from a more technical standpoint, we want to talk about how this has looked in as far as growth. So if we think about it, Ionic 1 has become quite a popular project, as I've said already, getting around a little bit over 24,000 stars on GitHub. Not that that's any sign of success, but it does show that there is quite a lot of traction on the GitHub repo, inside of our community, on our forums, that there's something going on there and it's not a stagnant project. We have meetup groups all around the world. We have one of our most popular meetup groups based in London. We have meetup groups in New York, San Francisco. Anywhere that you really go, there's bound to be an Ionic user group. And we even have apps that are topping the App Store for both iOS and Google Play. One of the most popular apps out there is an app called Swirkit. It's had over 12 million downloads, I think the last number was, and has been featured in both the iOS App Store and the Google Play App Store. So it's a very successful app, and it really goes to show that with web technology and just good development skills, you can build an app that is very successful. And aside from all of these small startups and 2 to 3 people who are making projects in their spare time, we're also seeing a lot of adoption inside of the enterprise. Um, Whether these are banking companies, insurance institutions, these are places where it makes sense for them to have a single code base that can be uh, used on both the web and on mobile apps. If these are internal applications or actually customer facing applications, it makes sense for them to be able to reuse some of that code and not have a completely different team for both web, iOS, and then Android. But what some people kind of think when they hear building mobile apps with web technology, they get this idea. It's like this whole web thing again. Didn't we already go over this where Facebook tried to tried to make their app on web technology, or didn't we go over this when we tried to do load 2,000 different contacts inside of a web view and then be able to scroll? Haven't we been down this road before? And some cases we say, yeah, that was a few years ago, and the web's gotten a lot better. And we've also seen a lot of changes in the different options we have out there. Um, People weren't impressed, so they went out and they started building these different frameworks. We have frameworks now that handle going from JS to a native runtime, and then some people just completely ditch the web and go to a full native application. While these are options, I tend to stick up for the web and think that the web can handle all this, especially in recent years. We've seen so much improvement in the web, on the web platform in recent years, coming up with everything from ES6 finally being ratified and actually starting to ship in browsers everywhere. Chrome is now 100% ES6 compliant. Safari is ES6 compliant. Even Microsoft Edge is ES6 compliant. We have better APIs available to us. We have better JavaScript engines as well. We have better languages to write on top of JavaScript and have some kind of a safety net. So the whole web development experience has gotten quite a bit better in recent years. And that's really what's been pushing Ionic to going forward. Taking what we know as the future of web and being able to build on top of that and ship something that takes advantage of all these new features that we have today and features that we may have down the road. So we have a few goals with Ionic 2. And basically, how do we take all the concepts from Ionic 1 that everyone knew and rework them to make them even simpler? Reduce the number of concepts that you have to learn, reduce the amount of code that you have to actually work with, and get you down to something that's a lot simpler, but still as effective and powerful. We want to revamp our navigation, basically being able to make any kind of navigation situation 100% possible. Our tooling, being able to take all of these new language features, these new APIs, being able to ship you something with a set of tooling setups that work for the people who just want to get going and are extensible for the folks who want to completely customize their building setup. And the last kind of hidden goal, we want to make learning Angular 2 much easier. A common thing that we heard was that Angular 2 is so much different from Angular 1. And while at first it may look like that, we've set out to work around with this and make it so that way going from Angular 1 to Angular 2 is much easier than one would expect. So for simplicity, I think it's easy to kind of see where we went with this when we start to look at some of the markup. Ionic 1 was at first point a CSS framework and then shipped with JavaScript bindings for different frameworks. And starting with that, we have the typical approach to styling components. So we have a bunch of CSS classes being applied to this anchor tag. This is from Ionic 1. The second one is from Bootstrap. And the third one is from Foundation. So all of these different CSS frameworks take the same approach. We have an element, we want to style it. We add a class to it. You want to style it even further. You add another class to it. But this isn't scalable, and you can end up getting a very confusing markup by just adding a few extra elements to this. So this is taken directly from some Bootstrap documentation, and I'm not even 100% sure what's going on here. I have a div with button group, and then some buttons that are also a type of button, but have a class of button, and then button default. And if it wasn't for the fact that they actually describe what they're trying to do in the actual Markdown markup, this would be very difficult to understand, or at least visualize what this is going to look like inside of the browser. So it gets to that point. CSS classes can get quite complex and clutter up your DOM. You can spend all this time trying to figure out what everything is going to look like with CSS classes, or we can take it from a different approach. So what we did with Ionic 2 was when the developer is working on their app and they want to use a certain layout, they just used raw elements, fully CSS driven, and we have this much more semantic looking markup that is much easier to understand and figure out what's going on. So, we can look at this markup right here. You notice that we have an Ion list. So we can assume that this is just going to be a list of items. We have our Ion items right here, all listing different movies. And then we have this list header. So we can start to assume that this is going to be a little separator between all of the different groups. And now we have a better understanding of what this markup is going to look like once it finally gets rendered. And if we want to extend this even further, if you want to buy into the whole element targeting of elements for styling, you can just specify the name of the element and then start to work with CSS as you traditionally would. Or if you are more comfortable with using classes, you can use classes as well. That way you can kind of have an understanding of anytime I see a class, I know that this is going to be coming from my styles and nowhere else. So our next part is probably the most impressive change that I've seen with Ionic 2. It's one of the things that I'm most excited about, and that's our navigation. And basically, we had a few topics that we thought about when we were going in and working on this. So, you want to open up a modal and then have some kind of sub navigation that is completely isolated to that modal. Or you want to open up a side menu and then have another parallel navigation stack inside of that menu. So these are some things that aren't 100% possible with Ionic 1. And it all comes down to how we did routing to begin with. Now, in Ionic 1, we used UIRouter, where you can attach a state, which is a bit of markup controller logic, and a URL. And you map to that using UIRouter state machine mechanism. Now, while this is great for web apps and traditional desktop websites, it doesn't give the flexibility that mobile apps actually need. So anytime you try to go outside of what you've already set up as your states and your URLs, it tends to fall short, and it doesn't allow you to recreate entire application state from nothing, dynamically add and remove states from history, things that developers need if they want to create intuitive apps. So we took a note from native, in this case, where they have this paradigm of push and pop, where if you want to push a new view or page or component onto this navigation stack, you reference it and then you just push it onto the stack. So in this case, if I want to go to a new page, it just pushes the new page onto the stack, and then I can pop that current page off the stack and go back to the root component. And this works with parameters as well. So if I want to pass along some data, in this case, I'm passing along a bunch of places, but you can think of this as a user object or some sort of to-do item. We can pass this along to our navigation by passing an object. So in this case, as we pass along, we're passing a selections object with the data of the items that we've selected from our previous state. And while those concepts are very simple, or at least seem simple, they allow for so much more features than Ionic 1 had. So now we can push pages onto stack, pop them off the stack, but we can also push 3 or 4 pages onto a stack and navigate to the last one. So that way we can dynamically create history. Or if we want to remove pages from the stack as we on the fly or update app history, it's all possible now because we have a fully independent navigation stack that is in charge of the app's history. A great situation for this, if you think about deep linking. When you want to deep link into an app, you would have to create some way of navigating around. Well, with this new navigation stack concept, we can deep link to the particular component in our app. And then when we get there, we can update the entire application stack. So that way, as the user hits the back button, we have this. We have the back experience that they that they would expect coming from somewhere else. And while this doesn't touch the URL by default, it is easy to set up and have it work with the URL. So that way, if you're deploying to, say, a browser, you can have the URL update and keep the back and stop breaking the back button. So, tooling. Tooling is really the most important part of any app structure because if you can't actually build with all these new features, what's the point of making an app? So it's no secret that JavaScript's really changed, especially in the past year and a half. A lot of this surrounding ES6 and all the new features that come with the language upgrade. We have new languages as well, such as TypeScript, which build on top of ES6 and ship with features that offer consideration into the language. And with all these changes, we have smarter IDEs and tool editors that can hook into all of these new language features and provide you with a better experience of when you're developing your app. ES6 has all of these new concepts of modules where we don't really have a global object, or where we don't keep things on the global object anymore. We have proper scoping for all of our functions. So that way, we can expect variables to be defined when they are. We have promises built into the language natively, so that way we don't need any promise polyfilling library. And we have classes for defining object-oriented apps, for doing object-oriented programming and providing a much simpler structure than the prototypes chain. TypeScript takes us even a step further with ES6, this concept of decorators, and this concept of static typing. So that way, if you pass a variable or if you have a function that expects two numbers and then you pass it a number and a variable, a number and a string at edit time, before you even run it in the browser, your editor will let you know, hey, you passed it a number and a string, but it was expecting two numbers. Something's not right here. You need to fix this. So we have this much powerful, this very powerful typing system, which allows you to have very strict coding standards. In fact, this is stuff that Ionic 2 uses internally to build out the framework. Angular 2 uses this as well. So there's obviously something there. And one of the big selling points that I think it has is code completion. So that way, as you are typing out your app and you're calling a specific method, as soon as you hit that dot, you can get all the completion for all the different methods that are on that class. But how do you actually start? If you go out and just search how to build an app with ES6 or TypeScript, you're bound to get confused, lost, and kind of frustrated as you see all the different options, all these different tooling systems, all these different build setups. It's not as straightforward as one would think. But don't worry about it. We have our setup that we ship with an Ionic 2 app that provides you with all the standard build steps that you'll need. And if you want to expand upon this and have your own custom build steps, we allow you to hook into our internal build system. So that way, everything you want to do is all possible. Again, concept is that it just works. You don't really have to think about any of the underlying setup. You don't have to think about it if you don't want, and you can just go ahead and build your app. So how would you actually get started building an Ionic 2 application? Well, first, we want to install the beta CLI. That's the most important part. So we npm install, make it global, Ionic app beta. This is going to pull down the beta CLI, which is going to include all the necessary features for a V2 application. From there, we want to start an app. So if you've done any Ionic 1 development before, this command is exactly the same as it would be in Ionic 1. But in this case, we want to pass a --v2 flag to let the CLI know we want a V2 app. We cd into that directory, and then we can run Ionic serve. So from here, let me actually switch screens real quick. Okay. And I'll open up a new tab. And I'm going to open up my editor. And then I'm also going to run Ionic serve. So you can see we're going through the typical tasks that we would need. We're cleaning out everything from before. We're setting up all of our build steps for compiling Sass. In fact, I'm actually going to use --lab to actually serve everything. But we can see, again, we're going to compile all scripts, copy all of our HTML over and minify it. All the things that you would expect from a typical build process. And with this, we have a live preview of iOS, Android, and Windows phones. So now if we want to go ahead and search, we have all of our views animating that follow the specific guidelines for their platform. We can go search for specific track names, artist name, album names. This is all using the Spotify API. We can search on a specific track. We can play that track using web audio, pause it, play it, and continue all of our app development. So let's move our editor to this screen. Let's take a look at some of this. So we have a typical app directory that you would expect from an Ionic 2 app, being a www folder, some platform and plugin folders, and also a hook directory. Now, what may look different is this app directory that we have right here. So we're no longer building in this www directory. We actually have a full build step, so that way we develop outside of it and compile into the proper directories. So our entry point is going to be this app.ts. We come in here, we have a couple import statements using ES6 imports where we can import a specific method or class. In this case, we're importing our Bootstrap process and platform class. We have our root component, which is, in this case, just a main navigation component. And then we have our class and then the main Bootstrap process. So if we think about this, we have a main navigation component. This would be your Ion nav view from Ionic 1. And instead of defining that root navigation component and then just loading up states with URLs, we can actually specify the root and using dynamic property bindings, set that root page to the menu page from our class. So if we go to look at the actual menu page, it's going to be in our pages directory. We'll go to menu and we'll load that as well. Now the menu HTML is actually loading up another root nav and then also using a side menu layout. If we go over here, we can see that we have this set up. We have the nice one-to-one gesture drag. Android has a nice overlay. Windows Phone has an overlay as well. And then we're also loading up a menu root. So inside of here, hide them in the sidebar, we can see that we'll look for a menu root property. And we're just loading up a search page. So far we have 2 pages where we're just loading up other components to render into. So that search page actually has most of the logic for us. So if we look at the search.ts, we have quite a few things going on in here. We have this reference to a navigation controller. We have this Angular component import. And then we have another page called results page. Then we have some form inputs. Hide those for now. And then we have our at component annotation. Now this is Angular 2 specific, but basically we have our at component annotation, which allows us to say that this class is going to be tied to this bit of markup. So we have this nice tying of markup and our classes. So that way we have this nice component driven architecture. So from here, inside of our search page class, we have a form where we're just taking where we can do some form development where we have a term and then a filter. And then we can set some default values for this. So if I come over and I change this to nothing, save, and we come back over to the browser, when the browser refreshes, we'll notice that we actually don't have a search term in place. And on top of that, we also have this button kind of disabled. So that way we know that we need an actual search term. So we're actually saying that we have validators on these actual inputs saying that everything is kind of required. From here, we have our constructor where we're just setting up a nav controller and then our form builder API, which is being used up here. And then in our actual search method, when everything is valid inside of our search form, we're just going to push the results page onto the navigation stack, pass along an object where we're going to have the term search, and its value is actually going to be the value of the search form. So let's actually look at that results page. So the results page has a little bit more going on, where we're calling this Spotify.load. Well, what's the Spotify.load? We look at it, Spotify service coming up from here, and that's in our providers, Spotify service, and our Spotify service.ts file. So we'll jump out of the pages real quick, look at the provider, and we have our Spotify service. So we can see this injectable annotation. And basically, this is going to allow Angular 2 to know how to properly inject this code into the build structure. So we have our class Spotify service, where we have our constructor, where we're just importing HTTP from Angular 2. And then from there, we have a couple different results. So if we don't have any, or if the filter is everything, we're actually going to go ahead and search through the Spotify API, coding the search term, and returning everything back from the HTTP request as JSON. If we do have a search filter, we want to add that into our actual request, encode it, and then actually send that back to JSON. So either way, we have some kind of handling of our form, and we have a response coming back. So when we go ahead and we search for Metallica, spell that right, we can search for it, and we know that we have everything back. But if we search for track names, it'll only return the ones with Metallica actually in the track name. And if we search for just the artist, we're only going to get back Metallica. We're not going to get back any other artists or any other bands. So we had that request kind of all working. And if we actually open up the dev tools real quick, we can actually see the network requests going out. So we'll actually go ahead. There we go. All right, so this is Safari, and their dev tools have changed a little bit, and I'm on Mac beta, so it may be a little bit broken right now. But still, the results are, we have our requests going out, we have the data coming back, and we have that data all available to us. Now, one thing to point out is that this time over here, it's actually not coming back as a proper date format. When we look at the actual console and see all of the data coming back, you notice that we have album. We actually have a data in here that is telling us, actually look at the markup real quick. We actually look at the markup. We have a track duration in milliseconds. So over here, we'll hide look at the object, and where is the track duration? Duration, here we go. We're actually getting back an unformatted duration of time. But we have this pipe over here, which is essentially saying, take this value and then pipe it into this other function. It's the same thing that we have in Angular 1 and Ionic 1 with filters, just been renamed a little bit to pipes to make a bit more sense. So if we go over to our pipes, we have a moment filter where we have a few things going on. So we have this main moment class and then this pipe annotation. So our pipe annotation allows us to specify the name of our pipe. In this case, anytime I reference moment, I'm specifically mentioning this pipe right here. So we have a transform method, which is going to be the main return from all of our pipes. We have our duration helper over here. And what this is going to do is just take the value that we're getting back from the pipe and just format it a little bit into a proper hour, minutes, and seconds format. So nothing crazy going on here. This is all just JavaScript going on. There's nothing Angular specific about it. But when we return the value from this, we have a nice, properly formatted minute and second duration. Close that for now. And the same thing, this is being used over here as well, and also being used in this progress bar. So that way, when we play the actual music, we can actually see that the progress is getting updated as the song preview is being played. Zoom in on it a little bit. It's a little bit smaller. I could probably make it bigger, but we can see that the styles are all being bound to the progress of this value, and everything's working as we would expect. You can stop it, reset the progress, play it, and when I go back, it'll actually stop the music, reset the time frame, and actually stop playing the music and reset the time frame, and have everything work as we expect. Now, for all of that code, if we look actually at the track detail page, we have just some standard ng ifs going on, some progress bars, and we're all centering around this audio tag. Now, if you didn't know, the audio tag actually has a few different methods on top of it. So we have this ended event and then this time update event. So these are actually native events bound to the actual element itself. These aren't Angular specific, but we can actually use Angular's event binding syntax, these curly braces around the event name, to bind methods from our class. So anytime the song or the audio ends, we're going to fire player ended. And anytime the actual audio time has updated, we're going to just call set progress to bind this value to the progress value. We'll look at that code real quick. So this is probably the most in-depth class that I have in this app, where we are just setting up some parameter definitions. Whenever we go from the search results page to this track detail page, we're passing along that single object. We have our view child annotation, which essentially allows us to go through our DOM in a nice Angular-friendly manner to search for elements and element references. And then we have our Spotify service and our actual navigation controllers, our params, and our event system. So in here, when we know that the page is going to leave, we're just going to call stop song. So this is using Ionic's own built-in hooks for handling our navigation events. If we want to toggle the song with our play and pause button, we can just do a simple, if this is playing, stop the song. If not, play the song. Play the song is actually using the audio that we've gotten from this at viewchild and calling the native element method play on it. And from stop song, we're actually just going to go ahead, set the current time for this value to 0, and then hit pause. So that way we can recreate this stop event. Now, this set progress over here, every time that the song plays and its progress actually changes, we're just going to take the current time of the actual song over the duration and multiply it by 100. So now we have this nice update cycle of 100% to 0%, or 0% to 100% inside of our app, so we can get that nice progress animation inside of our progress element. we have this player ended every time that the song is actually done, calling from our track detail page. We set a variable inside of our class saying that the if playing value is false, and then we just set the current time back to 0, so that way we can start over from the beginning. And we have this nice working app making HTTP requests, formatting data using pipes, filtering all the items out based on the request, setting up this markup to use avatar items, titles, all the proper data binding that we're used to seeing, going forward to setting up a full card detail where we have the album art as the cover. Again, our data bindings, playing with native audio, setting the actual value of this progress bar, and providing us with all these things that we would expect. If we were to run this on the actual on an actual device, whenever we were to set this app to run in the background, there is a native plugin set up in this to actually allow you to allow the music to play even when the app's in the background, and actually control the song and play pause features from your lock screen. Something that just adds a little bit extra touch to it, to what I think is an already good app example for what you can do with Angular 2 and Ionic 2. Now, this app probably took me about 25 minutes to kind of rough out, and then another half hour to kind of fine tune all the styles and details of it. So all in all, this app took probably an hour to build. Granted, I have a little bit more experience with Ionic 2 and all the internals of it, but there wasn't a whole lot going on inside of this application that required a lot of detailed explanation, a lot of detailed setup. I was able to actually just go ahead with a URL and, knowing the Spotify search API, build something that was a complete application within an hour. I think that's pretty impressive. Go back to the presentation for now. So with that, I just want to kind of wrap up a few final ideas. With Ionic 2, we're really pushing forward what we can do with web technology. The app I just kind of showed was a very tame example, but we've already seen apps being built where people are really pushing what we would expect the framework to be able to do. People who look down on the web, on web technology and web in general, the future for the web is looking really great. Between everything that all the browser vendors are doing, this is probably one of the best times to actually be involved in web technology and web development. And always bet on the web. It's never gotten worse. It's always improved. So I think that's a very, very optimistic outlook on it. I have the sample app actually up on GitHub right now. So if we actually, under M. Hartington, Star Trek, Ionic, so give this a look, clone it, npm install, and you should be able to run this app on your own machine and kind of go through all the details and go through all the code and figure out what's going on. We have a sample. We have all of our documentation. If you go to ionic.io/2, this will bring you to a nice little landing page and lead you to our documentation for the framework. Again, I'm M. Hartington. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I can take some now as well.
Hi, Mike. There is 2 questions on the comment section.
All right. So it looks like we got one question already. Can you talk about how the progress of making Ionic 2 a platform for building progressive web apps is going? Specifically deploying the same code base for mobile web version and an app package that's native version is something we can expect with Ionic 2. With Ionic 2, we really are pushing forward the concept of being able to take advantage of progressive web apps. So that way you can have web code without having a full native wrapper. This is something that we're currently working on and probably going to focus a lot more once we get the final version of Ionic 2 ready and out there. So I don't have any progress updates on it right now, but we can expect to see this after 2.0 is finally done. And what are some good animation frameworks that go with Ionic? Ionic, I didn't show it off here, but Ionic actually has its own animation class. So that way, if you wanted to if you want to animate any elements inside of your app, you can just use our animation class and it'll go ahead and do that as well. I know Angie Animate is actually going to be in the next release and should be available to use as well. Any other questions?
All right, I think that's all for the questions. Thank you, Mike, for the talk. Everyone just feel free to note down your questions and Mike will get back to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Ionic 2 is currently in beta, but we are very close to getting to our RC release. So look forward for that soon.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed the talk. And just before we go, if you're interested in Node.js, join us tomorrow on another webinar. That's all for today. And until next time, guys, cheers and enjoy your day.